world. I mean, this is...
All right, we apparently have lost our satellite to London, where Christiane Amanpour was just giving us the British reaction to the catastrophe that the United States witnessed yesterday. We will hope to bring her back a little bit later this morning. She also gave us some insights as to how the Prime Minister is dealing with this. He just very recently had a long conversation, 20-minute conversation with President Bush, as there is continued talk about what kind of collective effort needs to be made to fight this brand of terrorism. Let's catch up with Kyra Phillips right now, that has some more thoughts on how the nation will continue to react to what happened in Pennsylvania yesterday, what happened at the Pentagon, and the twin attacks here in New York City. Kyra?
Paula, thank you. Reaction is definitely the key word here. We're going to take you actually live to Logan Airport, and that is where two of the hijacked planes came from. We're going to turn it over to our Bill Delaney, who's live at the command center there. Bill, can you tell us what's happening right now within the center?
Well, thank you, Kyra. Hundreds of federal, state, and local police, led by the FBI, now fanning out here in the Boston area to try to determine how these hijackers could have gotten on the two planes that left Boston yesterday morning and ended up crashing into the World Trade Center. The question: was there some kind of a terrorist cell here in Boston that enabled these hijackers to lay the groundwork for what they did? Now, a security expert I spoke to here this morning, Kyra, said in many ways Boston is an ideal place for that sort of thing. It is a small city but a major city, and importantly, it's near an international border, Canada. Now, we know before the millennium, an Algerian was arrested on the Vermont border. This Algerian found to have ties to another Algerian who tried at that time to cross into Washington State for a terrorist action at the time of the millennium in Seattle. So we've seen that sort of thing here before. Also, we don't know if Arabs were involved in this, but if they were, there is a sizable Arab community here in Boston. It's a place one could obtain some anonymity, this security source said to me. Now, there are reports here, Kyra, this morning of several suspects being looked at who may have been involved in this hijacking. The Boston Herald newspaper reporting 2 brothers may have been involved, both carrying United Arab Emirates passports, one of them a trained pilot. Also, importantly, Kyra, a rented car taken from the central parking garage here at Logan Airport yesterday. Now, this rented car reportedly contained Arab language training manuals for flying a commercial aircraft. Now, the authorities focused on this car because a passenger who left here on a flight from Boston yesterday, when he arrived at his destination and found out about the terrorist actions, realized that he had had an altercation with several Arab men in the central parking garage. He called authorities, and they are looking at this vehicle. I should also mention that earlier this year, the FBI did determine that in the late 90s there were Arab men here, 2 with ties to the Osama bin Laden organization. They left suddenly in the late 90s, but one of them, a man named Bassam Kanj, had lived here for some 15 years working as a cab driver. He was subsequently killed in Lebanon in an attack on the Lebanese army, financed, security sources believe, by Osama bin Laden. The other Arab, Rail Hijazi, also was a cab driver here in Boston. He is in jail in Jordan for an involvement in a plan to blow up a hotel in Jordan that contained mostly American and Israeli tourists at the time of the millennium. So there have been traces of people tied to Osama bin Laden, if indeed Osama bin Laden was involved in this in the past here in Boston. And as I say, hundreds of federal, state, and local investigators now trying to sort out how hijackers got on those 2 planes here at Logan Airport yesterday.
Our Bill Delaney, thank you very much. Those are definitely riveting details. We'll continue to follow up with you at Logan Airport. Miles, we're going to take it back over to you at the desk.
All right, thank you very much, Kyra. Live pictures from the Pentagon right now. Let's take a look at the scene that is unfolding as the effort there continues. Not a lot of hope this morning. Matter of fact, no hope of finding any survivors inside the wreckage there of the Army side of the Pentagon. 5-sided building, obviously, 5 stories. Some portions of it are opened, and some portion of the 20,000 workers who typically report there every day are at work there on what is, of course, not a normal day, but the routine will try to continue. There was immediately before we took this live image, there was a convoy of vehicles. There you see them. This is a tape image which came down just a few moments ago. Convoy of vehicles there. We can presume they are part of the effort to continue the salvage efforts there at the Pentagon. We'll keep you posted as events unfold there. Back now to a live picture. Let's do a quick recap. It has now been 24 hours since the nightmare began and everything really changed. Today we are revealing more evidence of just how horrific it all was. In New York this morning, a frantic search and rescue effort continues. Crews have found some survivors amid the rubble of what was the World Trade Center. We underscore that point. Leveled the World Trade Center. Authorities tell CNN at least 9 people have been found alive this morning, but the death toll from the terrorist attacks is expected to be staggering. All we know now is it will be in the thousands. The horror began to unfold 24 hours ago as a plane tore through the first of the World Trade Center towers. This picture came in overnight. It's a different angle on it. Ripped into the building, created a huge fireball. That was American Airlines Flight 11, a 767 with 81 passengers, 11 crew members. It was supposed to fly from Boston to Los Angeles, somewhere over the Adirondack Mountains. It took a sharp detour to the south. Now, 18 minutes later, a second jet slammed in to the other tower of the World Trade Center, both of them 110 stories high. This is United Flight 175. Also point of origin was Boston, also intended destination of Los Angeles. Both of those aircraft heavily laden with fuel for the transcontinental flight. 56 passengers, 9 crew members on board that plane. We've had reports from cellular telephone conversations that were managed to be delivered from these planes that there were knife-wielding suspects who commandeered these aircraft and were at the controls of the aircraft at the time. Now, both World Trade Center towers, of course, eventually collapsed. Here, as we see right here, the second tower imploding. That was at about 10 o'clock Eastern time yesterday. Those the gleaming symbols of New York for more than 20 years now, symbol of our wealth, symbol of U.S. prosperity. All of it now reduced to rubble today, and there are 5 sub-floors there. And earlier in our reporting, Gary Tuckman was indicating there is some hope that there may be additional survivors deep beneath that rubble. An amazing Herculean effort underway right now to try to find people who might be alive in that pile of rubble, many thousands of tons. At the Pentagon this morning, firefighters poured more water on the smoldering building damaged by the suicide plane attack. That was American Airlines Flight 77, 757, Dulles to Los Angeles, its intended destination. 58 passengers, 6 crew members, 800 people killed in that particular attack. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld says the Pentagon is in fact open for business today. We should say portions of the Pentagon, those deemed fit and those deemed safe for occupants. But the concern about that structural integrity will keep everybody out but the essential personnel, at least for today. Still no word on exactly how many people were injured total in that attack. We are getting ballpark estimates of, as we said, 800 people killed in that attack. The attack at the heart of the U.S. financial center is reverberating throughout world markets today. In Japan, the Nikkei average plunged below 10,000 for the first time in 17 years. European stock market averages are undergoing sharp price swings today. Most opened lower and showed some gains before moving lower again. U.S. financial markets will remain closed today. The World Trade Center is, of course, at the heart of the financial district for this country. Across the U.S., there are some cases of soaring gas prices, which we could probably infer to be a bit of profiteering. In some places, the price jumped to nearly $5 a gallon. The nation's largest oil companies are trying to ease fears by pledging to keep distribution steady. That brings you up to date this morning on a morning that will be a morning that we are forever changed. Send it back to Paula Zahn in New York. Paula?
Miles, I want to try to give you an idea of what life is actually like in New York City today, drastically different from an average weekday. As you look at the streets, there is a fraction of the traffic you'd normally see. You'd usually see bumper-to-bumper traffic at that corner at this time of the morning. The reason for this is that all public schools are closed, private schools, parochial schools. The Dow Jones is closed, the NASDAQ is closed. All businesses south of 14th Street, which is not far from this platform, are closed today. You still have bridges and tunnels, inbound bridges and tunnels closed at this hour. So you might describe the city as in a state of paralysis. Many companies advising their workers to stay at home today. And as folks stay at home, they're just beginning to come to grips with how their city has changed. I want to go to Gary Tuchman right now, who has gotten closer than just about anyone this morning to that perimeter area surrounding the World Trade Center. Gary, can you give us an update now on any of the rescues underway?
Well, first of all, Paul, it was 24 hours close to this very moment that the United Airlines plane went through the South Tower of the World Trade Center. And that's where the South Tower used to stand. You can see the skeleton of it right now. And in the foreground, you see dozens of members of the Army National Guard who are now on the streets of Lower Manhattan here, protecting New York City. It's a sight we never thought we'd ever see in New York City, let alone the United States. Members of the National Guard like this standing out there with their helmets on, guns on their sides. But that's the situation here right now in Lower Manhattan on the corner of Church and Reed Street, normally a very busy place. This would be morning rush hour. Now it's quiet. No members of the public are allowed out here right now. It's just emergency officials, police, the Army National Guard, and some members of the media who've gotten as close as we can. We are using right now a video telephone because we're in a place where we can't use our normal live truck to give you a live signal, and that's why we have this particular signal with you right now. And with us right now is an officer who's been on the scene for more than 12 hours. This is Officer Wayne Diana. He's with the South Plainfield, New Jersey Police Department. Sir, tell me what the scene was like for you.
We got in, they busted us in from New Jersey into Staten Island, and they brought us over on the ferry. We started out at the lower end and walked up. We wound up in Ground Zero at about sometime, I guess, around midnight, searching for survivors. Myself and two other officers from my department were in the alley in the road between the two towers. We spent about 4 or 5 hours going through vehicles, looking under vehicles. At one point, we got into I guess it would be the South Tower. The second floor of the South Tower, there's a daycare center, apparently employee daycare center. We searched through there, we found nothing. Apparently those people were able to get out. It's a war zone. It's an absolute war zone. It's the worst thing I've ever seen.
How many people would you say are down there right now?
Rescue workers, thousands. They're just all over the place. I mean, the city has come together. Every possible city agency you could think of is down there. Private contractors in there with heavy equipment moving huge pieces of building and steel, and police cars and fire trucks that are wrecked down there. They're in the process of moving those out now with forklifts. It's going to be a long operation.
We've reported that 9 survivors have been found. 6 of them members of the New York City Fire Department, 3 Port Authority of New York and New Jersey police officers. Did you see any survivors?
We didn't see anybody. We had already pulled out of the Ground Zero area before that rescue operation concluded. We went back a couple blocks outside of the Ground Zero area and went to sleep on the sidewalk. We slept for about 2 or 3 hours, and we came back in. It's a very frustrating effort because there's just so much debris that you can't get near where the people who may have survived the explosion are.
Frustrating and frightening. How horrible has this been for you?
It's scary. It's scary. Life as you and I know it has changed in this country. I mean, we've always felt that the United States of America was the safest place in the world, and we're wondering now whether that's still the case.
Officer, thanks for joining us. Good work out there for the last 12 hours. I want to clarify the damage that occurred here. We all know that the 2 big towers, the 110-story towers, 1 World Trade Center and 2 World Trade Center both came down. We are told that when 1 World Trade Center came down, it fell on a smaller building called the 4 World Trade Center building. And then many of you know yesterday afternoon, the 7 World Trade Center building, another 47-story building, also came down. So 4 of the World Trade Center buildings in the complex have been destroyed. Paula, back to you.
Gary, there is so much we've heard over the last 24 hours. You made it clear. It literally was just about 24 hours that the second hijacked airliner slammed into South Tower, trapping thousands of people inside before the building collapsed. There's so much we've heard to absolutely sicken us. But I think that the one piece of information that has really affected New Yorkers is the fact that some 250 New York firefighters are presumed dead. Among those, New York City's fire chief, its deputy fire chief, some 85 New York City police officers missing. What kind of impact does that have on the morale of these rescue workers who are in extremely challenging situations?
It has a multi-dimensional impact. First of all, they are very sad and very depressed. Obviously, in any situation like this, you would see some very serious police officers and firefighters. But many of these people have told us they have lost their friends. They believe they've lost their friends. And we have seen in many cases, many of them crying. But multidimensional because it also makes them more determined. They want to find their friends. Obviously, they want to find civilians who are inside that building too, but they are hoping and praying with all their might that they find people who they've worked with for many years and find that they've survived. Paula.
All right, thanks so much, Gary. Once again, Gary reporting that in total some 9 folks have been rescued, some 6 firefighters, 1 Port Authority police officer, that was in the wee hours of the morning, and 2 police officers last night. And city officials are hopeful that 2 more folks trapped inside will successfully be rescued. One of those victims actually establishing cell phone contact with his family. Gary Tuchman will continue to keep us posted on that. Once again, he is closer to any of the information sources than anybody else on this story. Right now, I'm going to check in with Hillary Lane, who joins us from St. Vincent's Hospital, one of the critical centers that took in victims all day yesterday, last night. Hillary, give us an update as to what your hospital's dealing with at the moment.
Well, Paula, at about 7:45 Eastern Time this morning, officials here at St. Vincent's got a phone call that there had been survivors found in the rubble, as Gary has been reporting. The staff here geared up. If you take a look behind me, you can see that there are numbers of doctors and nurses and emergency personnel on standby. But in the past hour or so, only one person brought in. That was a man who collapsed immediately onto a stretcher and was wheeled into the hospital. And what really seems to be the story here, in the words of one doctor, it is catastrophic. In the words of another, disappointing and absolutely sobering, is that there are so many people standing around and so few patients who have been brought in. The numbers at this point, 365. Only about 40 of those brought in overnight. The majority of those brought in were firefighters and rescue personnel. There have been 4 fatalities brought here, 1 to an affiliated hospital. A short while ago, we heard from one of the paramedics who had been on the scene as of 9 a.m. yesterday morning, and here is how he described it.
Initially, I was there for about 15 minutes. There were a couple explosions. It became dangerous. We grabbed one person. We commandeered an ambulance and just hightailed it out of there. My prayers are to the fellow firefighters, EMS, police officers that have died, and hopefully we'll be able to get some more out of there. We weren't able to get to the scene simply because it was very unsafe. So please, if you can, everybody, please pray for those that have fallen today.
Now, major burn cases have been some of the most serious injuries here, and doctors say those were people who were able to make it out on their own yesterday. And if you take a look at the rubble, you can see the delicate situation that the rescue workers have to go through in order to extricate anybody who might be alive. They are cheered any time that they do receive some sort of communication. Some of it has been by cell phone, but those cases are few and far between. What one of the hospital officials here was telling me earlier is that the paramedics say that they stop about every 45 minutes and they check in for sounds. They use special dogs to see if they can hear anything, if they can smell anything. I'd like to take a look. There's an ambulance pulling up behind me and shouts that there may be one of the firefighters inside. I can't confirm that for you at this point, but people moving into action here as they wait for any survivors to be brought in. Triple the staff than usual in the emergency room, ready to handle any of the victims. And doctors here are saying that the sort of casualties they're likely to see here today are going to be far worse than anything that they have seen yesterday. As I mentioned earlier, that first phone call came in at about 7:45 with word that some of these rescued personnel might be on their way in here. Doctors were then saying that they hadn't seen anything at that point. They may have been transferred over to other centers to handle burns, maybe up to the trauma unit at Cornell or over to Bellevue perhaps. So that is the story here. Very, very sobering to these people who are waiting to treat the victims, and very telling that many more victims have not been brought in. Paula?
Hillary Lane, thanks so much for that update. As I hear you heard your report, I guess I'm reminded that none of us are supposed to inject our own personal feelings in covering these stories, but you can't help but have a great deal of respect for the way volunteers are dealing with the carnage that has been wrought in this city. We had told you earlier this morning we expected Mayor Giuliani to hold a news conference. It has been delayed. We were expecting that about 45 minutes ago. We were told now it will get started shortly, and we'll go to that live. But once again, the level of support shown for the victims here is extraordinary. The scene you just saw playing out at St. Vincent's Hospital is being repeated all over the city, with doctors from neighboring hospitals trying to get in the city. In fact, it's difficult to get into the city today because there are a number of inbound bridges that are still closed. They're trying to get here to volunteer their services. People are trying to donate blood. There are reports even this morning of lines continuing to wrap around blocks of people trying to help out. In one of the more disturbing stories that's being reported, a barge last night actually carried some of the dead from New York into New Jersey. There are reports of cab companies literally ripping seats of their vans to actually carry the dead to New Jersey as well. We've heard a number of paramedics reinforce the fact that makeshift morgues are being set up all over the city. But the bottom line is, and I am sure that the mayor will probably reiterate this morning, no one, Miles, has any idea of the magnitude of loss in this city. There is hope downtown this morning, as you just heard Gary report, that 9 firefighters and police officers have been rescued from the rubble. There is hope that 2 more rescues will be successfully pulled off. But the fact is, what the mayor said last night will probably be true. And his words, quote, the deaths will be very, very high. The death toll, quote, horrendous. So, Miles, maybe some of this will become clearer later today. I doubt it, though, because once again, I think Gary Tuchman has made it quite clear from those rubble pictures how difficult it is for rescue workers to even get into this area. Miles?
All right, thank you very much, Paula. Undoubtedly, it'll be a very difficult number to fathom. We should let you know that in about 7 minutes' time or so, officials at the Los Angeles International Airport will be holding a news briefing. 3 of the 4 hijacked flights were destined for Los Angeles, and we hope to bring you live coverage of that. That also lies ahead. Let's move now to Capitol Hill. Yesterday on Capitol Hill, a lot of tough talk and at least one touching moment. The tough talk coming from members of Congress vowing for retaliation, singling out Osama bin Laden and his organization as the group responsible for these attacks. The touching moment coming on the steps of the Capitol as members of Congress broke into song, singing God Bless America, a moment I will never forget. Let's turn it now to Kate Snow, where she will tell us about the U.S. House of Representatives going to gavel to session, and a symbolic session, right, Kate?
That's right, and the Senate as well, Miles. At 10 o'clock this morning, they will be gaveling back in here. In fact, they never went out of session last night. Yesterday, they were evacuated, but they technically never stopped meeting, and that's an important point to make. Let me tell you first about the security situation here, Miles. There is a perimeter set up around the United States Capitol, 1 block east and west of the Capitol behind me, 2 blocks to the north, 2 blocks to the south. They're checking IDs. They're letting in people who work in the buildings here, staff, and obviously members of Congress starting now to come back. We have seen some joggers, some people walking their dogs around this area, so we know they're also letting people in on foot. Whether they're going to let tourists into the United States Capitol for tours today is still being decided. Normally there's a huge line of tourists out here by this hour. Miles, this morning there's hardly anyone here in the way of tourists. Let me tell you also that clearly there is an effort to show that it is business as usual here in the Capitol this morning. At 10 o'clock this morning, as we've mentioned, the House and the Senate will reconvene. They will both be in their chambers, at least for a short period of time. The Senate plans to debate a resolution and give 10 minutes to every U.S. senator to speak on the floor. That translates into about 16 hours worth of talk that we're going to hear out of the senators today. On the House side, they're going to come in, they're going to come back a little bit later this afternoon and debate the same resolution. This is a resolution condemning yesterday's actions. We also understand that the House members and the Senate members are going to receive a closed-door briefing at some point this afternoon from intelligence officials, perhaps from the FBI, perhaps from the CIA. All night long, Miles, the dome light on the very top of the Capitol has been burning here. That's because, as I mentioned, the Congress never officially went out of session. That light that you see at the top of your frame is always on when the Congress is in session. It's a technical thing, but it's also a very symbolic thing. Last night, that shone all night long. The leadership, as you mentioned, appeared on the steps of the Capitol to send a message. Republicans and Democrats last night speaking with one voice.
We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts.
The message has to be that we're going to hunt you down and we're going to find you and we're going to make you pay that price.
America was hit today, but this government of the American people, for the American people, is back up on its feet. And we are functioning, and we are going to go forward together.
The leaders of Congress will meet this morning with President Bush at 11:30 at the White House. We also understand that those leaders were in hiding yesterday for some period of time. There's about 9 leaders between the House and the Senate, 5 from the House, 4 from the Senate, who are the highest-ranking people in this body of government. They all went to a secure location. We've learned some more details about that, Miles. 2 by 2, they were taken by helicopter to an underground location. Speaker of the House Hastert was taken earlier in the day, right after the plane crashed into the Pentagon. He was immediately taken away from the Capitol. About 3 hours later, the rest of the leadership was taken to that secure location. They sat together for several hours, watching television together, we're told. I'm told by one aide that it was a grim situation, and I'm also told by that same aide that they were a very bipartisan group. This aide saying they're bipartisan now. I expect that will carry over in the business in the coming days. Miles.
CNN's Kate Snow on Capitol Hill, thank you very much. We've just learned that President Bush will be holding a meeting of his national security team in about 2 minutes' time in the Cabinet Room at 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. He will be making a statement to the media. We'll, of course, bring that to you as soon as we get that videotape, as soon as we capture that. Kelly Wallace is manning our post at the White House this morning from the North Lawn. Kelly, this meeting, they'll be discussing the parameters of response, undoubtedly. Can you give us any insights as to what is being discussed right now?
Well, that is going to be the opportunity for the president to get the most up-to-date briefing on the investigation into who could be responsible for these attacks, as well as for the search and recovery efforts, because a big focus for the administration today is that the administration, the U.S. government, is doing everything it can to assist with recovery efforts in New York, in Pennsylvania, and of course outside Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon. So you will obviously hear the president talk about that. In fact, we understand he will be calling on the American people to do their part and to step forward and donate blood. There will in fact be a blood drive here at the White House, a bloodmobile pulling into the White House driveway earlier today. But again, as you noted, a big focus, just who might be responsible for these attacks. Now, Miles, U.S. officials publicly and even really privately not speculating at this time who they think might be responsible. U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell on the air earlier today saying that he doesn't think it will be too long before the U.S. government is confident it does know who is responsible. But as we've been reporting, senior officials did brief key members of Congress last night. Some of those members talking to some of my colleagues at CNN, those members saying U.S. officials confident that the evidence right now pointing to affiliates or associates of Osama bin Laden. One other thing I want to show you, Miles, really a picture that sort of captures the mood here at the White House. As you would expect, the flag at half-staff on top of the White House and on top of the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Really a measure and a reflection of the tragedy felt all across the United States on this day. Another note, as Kate mentioning, members of Congress coming over here to the White House to meet with the president. This is an opportunity to show that Democrats, Republicans, all united behind the president. And one other note, security quite tight here at the White House, still very much on a high state of alert. Miles, back to you.
CNN's Kelly Wallace at the White House. Thank you very much. Once again, the president will meet with his national security team right about now, and we should be hearing from them a statement to the tight pool, if you will, of press reporters that will be allowed into the cabinet room at 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. We will get that to you as soon as we receive it. Let's turn it now to David Ensor, who is in our Washington bureau with a bit of breaking news. David.
Well, Miles, I want to be very careful how I put this, but U.S. officials confirm that 3 planes in the airspace of Western Canada near Vancouver are currently being tracked by Canadian officials, by the Canadian Air Force and ground officials, and it's unclear what these aircraft are up to. They are attempting to ascertain who's flying them, and chances are, officials say, that there's nothing to this, nothing nefarious. You're probably going to hear a lot of these kinds of reports. The airspace of the entire North American continent is now being watched very closely by thousands of people. But nonetheless, we can confirm that there are 3 aircraft that they are still trying. The Canadian officials are still trying to identify, figure out who they are, why they're up there. They expect to very soon be able to report that there's nothing untoward about this, but at this point they are not able to do so. So those 3 aircraft are being tracked very closely, according to U.S. officials, Miles.
David, cognizant of the delicacy of this situation, do we know them to be large aircraft, airliners, or are they general aviation aircraft?
We have no additional information beyond what I've just told you, except to say that it is a tracking effort by the Canadian Air Force as well as Canadian civilian authorities. Being taken very seriously up there, but as I say, U.S. officials believe they will shortly be able to announce that there's nothing to this, but given the level of alert now, anything like this is being watched closely, Miles.
And David, just to clarify one point in my mind, that unprecedented grounding of all aircraft in the United States yesterday, did that apply in any way to Canada?
My understanding is there were some parts of Canada, particularly along the border, that where airports were grounded. A lot of planes were rerouted to there, of course, from the United States. Canada has been very closely cooperating with U.S. officials in the effort to get to the bottom of this and to retrack aircraft if need be. So they are now in constant communication with U.S. officials here in Washington and elsewhere on these 3 aircraft, and as I say, they're hoping to be able to ascertain very soon that there's nothing nefarious to them. But they haven't done so yet. Miles.
CNN's David Ensor, who covers national security for us, joining us from our Washington bureau. And we should just underscore the point that this is a story that is unfolding as we speak, and there will be many dead ends as we go down the road here. Bear with us as you join with us in the news gathering process, if you will. Let's turn it back now to Paula Zahn in New York. Paula.
All right, thanks, Miles. I need to mention that a bunch of us up here on the platform have just sighted what we believe to be a military jet doing some kind of flyover. In light of what David Ensor is reporting, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when he is describing, his report made sense describing the activity in Canada, but this jet was traveling south and slightly east of here, appeared over Fifth Avenue. We have no idea what the relevance of that flight is, but it clearly was a military jet. Some folks on here who are very good at identifying military aircraft thought it was an F-16. We will try to confirm whether it was and what it all means. But right now, I have the honor of joining King Abdullah of Jordan now for his reaction to what has happened here in the United States. Your Majesty, thank you very much for joining us today. Do you have any idea who is responsible for this massacre in the United States?
I think at this stage it is too early to tell. Obviously, the international community, Jordan included, is working very closely with the United States to try and come up with some answers as quickly as possible. But I'm sure in a very short period of time we'll be able to identify the individuals or the organizations that were behind this very barbaric act.
What kind of intelligence support are you providing the United States?
Well, many countries in the Middle East, as well as further afield, are working closely together with the different agencies in the United States to compare information. And this is not just because of the crisis. This is something that has been going on for many years. But obviously, everybody's in their offices working night and day to try and get to the bottom of this horrendous crime as quickly as possible.
And in what way is Jordan attempting to combat terrorism right now?
Well, obviously, Jordan has been working very closely with the United States for many years due to the unfortunate experiences that our country have gone through. And we have a very close working relationship between the security services, the intelligence communities of both countries. But again, I think you must understand that on combating international terrorism is actually a combined effort by many countries all over the world, and we're just part of that effort.
As I understand it, you were halfway across the Atlantic on your way to the United States and your jet turned around. What else can you tell us about that?
Well, really, we were almost coming towards the coastline of Nova Scotia when we got the information of the first incident of the first aircraft hitting one of the towers. And as the information began to unfold, obviously we did feel like we wanted to continue to the United States. Air traffic was a problem at that point. And obviously we realized that the government and the federal agencies were going to have their hands full because of the tragic circumstances. So it was better to return home at that point. But all of us here in Jordan would like to share in the sorrow and the grief that has befallen the United States, and in particular the families of the victims involved.
A number of world leaders, including yourself, have condemned this attack. Yasser Arafat yesterday condemning the attack. What is your reaction to some of the Palestinians yesterday in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank who were celebrating these attacks in the United States as a victory against Israel?
Well, I think we were here in Jordan just as shocked as you are. But again, as you said, a small group, and I think this is a small group of individuals that we're celebrating, and in no way is a reflection of the Palestinian people or the peoples of the Middle East. I think all of us are shocked and saddened and distraught that so many innocent people have been hurt or killed in this devastating incident. And we all have families, and just to think of putting ourselves in the shoes of those bereaved ones in the United States, I think has touched everybody. I have friends of mine in New York. I spent yesterday on the airplane trying to call my friends to make sure they were all right. I think all of us have been touched by this incident, and I hope that this is a renewed effort now by the international community to really be able to work much stronger together. There's a lot more that we can do to break down the barriers of cooperation between different countries, to try and rid ourselves of this horrendous form of international terrorism.
Your Majesty, do you think U.S. policy in the region made the United States vulnerable to this attack?
I believe that many countries in the world have been target for terrorist organizations. As I said, this is not a phenomenon of this week. The United States and the international community has been battling terrorism for several decades now. And again, it must be pointed out that this is an ongoing battle that happens every day. And I'm somewhat surprised that something like this had not happened sooner. I mean, the law of averages, sooner or later, the bad guys are going to get one through. And, you know, we have to understand that. And I hope America has, and I'm sure it will have the strength and determination to pick ourselves up and really take the fight back to the terrorists and those responsible for the heinous crimes that we saw perpetrated yesterday.
So it sounds to me, Your Majesty, and I have to do this briefly, that in essence you're saying perhaps even if, as one of our guests suggested earlier today, peace had been achieved in July of 2000, this still, in the Middle East, this still might have happened.
I don't believe so, because I think that if you had solved the problems of the Middle East, and obviously the core issue is that between the Israelis and Palestinians, I doubt very much that this incident would have taken place. And again, that was a reminder to all of us, and why I think so many of us in the international community have been working so hard to bring a stop to the violence and bring people back to the peace process, because in a vacuum, you do allow the extremists the upper hand and a chance to try things as was happened yesterday. And they will continue on trying until we can solve the problem once and for all.
King Abdullah, it is an honor to have you join us here at CNN. We very much appreciate your time. Thank you again for joining us. Right now we're going to head back to Atlanta, where Miles O'Brien is standing by. Miles, there's been a flurry of siren activity down below. We have no idea, again, what the significance of that is, or the significance of the military jet that made a pass over south early this morning, but we'll try to figure out what all that means and bring that information to you.
All right. Paula keeping us posted from New York. The Pentagon was built immediately after World War II and then stood impervious during all those Cold War years. And today, at least one face of it lies a charred ruin. Several hundred people killed as the third aircraft to strike hit yesterday morning. Ken Bacon is a former Pentagon spokesperson. First of all, thanks for being with us. And if you could just share with us your reaction to what you've seen unfold.
Well, I was horrified like everybody else. Friends of mine were in that building, but I think the most important thing to focus on today is that the building is still operating. I understand that 2/3 of the 24,000 people who normally work in the Pentagon are there today carrying on operations, and I think this is a strong symbol of American resolve and resilience.
The attack, obviously, a strong symbol of the defiance of these terrorists. This must in some way shake and rattle the people who work inside that building and all the people they represent in the U.S. military at large.
Well, of course, literally and figuratively shake and rattle. But the fact of the matter is that the people who are in the military today, serving our nation, understand that they're at risk. They understand this when they join the military. This is not the type of risk they anticipated, but they anticipate that they will face risk. I think that the important thing is that they're back at work, they're ready to do their job, and respond to any instructions they get from the President.
As we look at some pictures from lower Manhattan today, as the effort begins there, hard to even comprehend the amount of the Herculean task that lies ahead to find possibly additional survivors, and then of course just begin the forensic process. I'm curious, you've been privy to the behind the closed door meetings that occur in the wake of something like this. What's being said? What's being laid out on the table as the options for the current White House?
Okay, first of all, at the Pentagon itself, there are three priorities: care for the casualties, limit the damage, and maintain operations. And I think that Secretary Rumsfeld's quick run down to the bombed area yesterday showed that he was paying attention to the casualties. Then he went right back to the command center. Right now, what the Pentagon is doing is working with, well, it carries on the operations and takes care of the casualties, tries to stop the burning. It is working with the intelligence agencies to try to figure out who's responsible for this, what I consider to be an act of war against our National Military Command Center, and two, to present the President with a list of options that he can invoke, from which he can choose in making a response.
Mr. Bacon, you know, at the risk of doing some Wednesday morning quarterbacking here, if you will, there's been a lot of criticism of the intelligence community in the wake of this. There always is in the wake of a terrorist attack like this. Cognizant of the fact that we talk about, you know, literally the fog of war, do you think there was a misstep? Was there a lack of communication that made this attack possible?
I don't think it's, well, clearly something went wrong. We know that to begin with. But I don't think it's fair right now to point fingers or cast aspersions on any part of our intelligence community. We need to get more facts. We depend on a series of defenses, on perimeter defenses, and one of them is airport security. Clearly there was a lapse of airport security here. But what more happened, what signals we might have missed, is too early to tell right now. What we can say is we as a nation have been working very hard for the last 5 or 10 years to improve our responses to terrorism. We've made considerable progress. Clearly, we have to do more.
If you were still involved in your former role as the spokesperson for the Defense Department at the Pentagon, what would you be advising your bosses to do today and in the coming days?
I'd advise them to do what they've done, to be forthright with the American public, to present information as soon as they're certain of that information.
Mr. Bacon, my apologies. I have to interrupt you. We're going to go to New York now. Mayor Rudy Giuliani with a news conference. Let's listen in.
Good morning. We just completed a long meeting with all of the agencies of the city, state, governor, participated in it, and the Port Authority, so that we can work on the things that we have to do today to, first of all, focus our efforts on recovering as many people as we can and save lives. Second, try to begin the removal of debris to that area of the city, which is going to be a task that goes on for at least 2 or 3 weeks. And then focus on the other issues that are of importance to the city. Make sure that food comes into the city, make sure that people are able to go about their lives and are taken care of in the hospitals, and to try to bring the city back to normal as soon as possible. And we're going to aim to try to do that for the rest of Manhattan starting tomorrow. And we'll be focusing on that and trying to accomplish that all day today. We have been successful in recovering at least one other person, Port Authority police officer. We're hopefully going to be able to recover a fourth one, and we're in the process of doing everything we can to try to locate other people, and that'll be the major focus of our attention. We also appeal to since some came forward late yesterday and last evening. If they do, please contact the police department and the FBI, because it could be of enormous help in the investigation of the case. We're going to try to open schools tomorrow. We're hopeful that we'll be able to, we certainly will be able to do it in the entire city, and we'll be working on a plan for the maximum number of schools that we can open on the east side of Manhattan, particularly the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Con Edison is working, I think, as intensely as they possibly can to try to get power restored. It's going to take some time, and we're bringing generators in. The governor made available to us a group of generators that we've moved to Randall's Island, and we will be using them in that area of the east side that needs generator power, because they may need it for quite some time. We were able to move 120 dump trucks out of the city last night, which will give you a sense of the work that was done overnight. So some of the debris has already been removed. More of it is being removed, and it'll be done by barge all throughout the day today. The subway system is operating in all of the city, but below 14th Street, and largely because right now we have that closed. So If you're in any of the other 4 boroughs, public transportation is normal. The subways are normal. The buses are normal. If you're in Manhattan, the subways are going to be working to 14th Street, and then for those that go underneath, they'll just go straight out to Brooklyn. As soon as we can get that area of the city open, however, there will be subway service there, except for the 1, 2, and 3 lines, the West Side IRT below 34th Street, because of the collapse that took place. And again, we ask all New Yorkers to cooperate and to try to help each other. There are going to be a lot of people today who need help and need assistance, either because of the fact that they know people that were lost in this terrible tragedy, or because they're just frightened of what may happen. If you could comfort them and help them and assist them, particularly elderly people, that might be a way in which you can contribute. And we're getting very, very close cooperation from the state, from the federal government. I think people in New York, the best way they can deal with this right now is not only to deal with their own grief, which we all feel and have, but to show that we're not going to be in any way affected by this, that we're not going to be cowed by it, that we're not afraid, that we're going to go about our business and lead normal lives and not let these cowards affect us in any way like they're trying to do, which is to instill fear in us. Governor?
Mayor, thank you. As the mayor indicated, the focus right now is still on search and rescue in the hopes that we can get other people out of the debris and save more lives. We have, at last count, 18 different search and rescue teams down there. And I want to thank my colleagues. We have 8 from Connecticut that Governor Rowland sent in, others from around the country. We have a specialized team coming that Governor Calderon is sending from Puerto Rico. And it's this type of support from around the country that is allowing us to get through this. I have to tell you, I was down at the scene last night, and Mayor, your police and fire not only were heroes at the beginning, but they're still heroes. They're down there under enormous personal strain and risk. I saw them at the ground zero while a high-rise was on fire right across the street that could have collapsed, and they are risking their lives to try to save their friends and their colleagues and the New Yorkers who are still trapped. And we have to thank them, say a prayer for them. This is a time for rescue, it's a time for commitment, but it's also a time to reflect and grieve for those who didn't have their parents come home last night, or for those who still might be lost. And we will get through this because, as the mayor indicated, New Yorkers come together in times of crisis, and we've seen tremendous spirit donating blood, volunteering at hospitals, helping us to get through this. And we have done everything we could to be supportive. We have National Guard troops here now. We are mobilizing fire departments from Westchester and Rockland that are backing up in the Bronx. We're mobilizing fire departments from Nassau and Suffolk that will help in some of the outer boroughs on Long Island. But what we don't need are people just simply coming in to volunteer. We have the hotlines, we have the organization, we have tremendous coordination between the city and the state and the federal government. So people who want to exercise their expertise, whether they're firefighters, they should contact the fire department. If they're EMTs or nurses, they should contact the hotline that we have set up at the state, where we've already had about 10,000 calls. So this is a tragic episode in American history, but New Yorkers will get through this. America will get through this. We will not be intimidated. We will not lose our freedom.
What is the status of the World Trade Center?
One other thing that we should do. These are the flight recorder boxes that the firefighters and the police officers and the rescuers are looking for, and we're going to we'll give you copies of this. We'd like you to put it out as broadly as possible. We're giving copies to all the rescue people and recovery people, so that they can try to find them. Altogether there'll be 4, 2 for each airplane, and that's what they look like, except it'll be obviously covered with soot and dirt. But there are a lot of people involved in the recovery and relief effort who know what they're looking for, and then there'll be some that don't. So if we can give those out, it would be very important. This morning's meeting was devoted to the relief and recovery effort largely. This afternoon we're going to focus on the economic recovery of the city and work with the hotels, the restaurants, the real estate industry. We're going to we're going to rebuild. We're not only going to rebuild, we're going to come out of this stronger than we were before. And in addition to having wonderful people in New York, as the governor indicated, we also have the strongest business community of any place in the world. You know, we're going to call upon them, and we're going to need their help. But we're going to come out of this emotionally stronger, politically stronger, much closer together as a city, and we're going to come out of this economically stronger too. And we're going to start working on that right away.
What's the status of the World Financial Center? There appears to be a fire burning across the street now, fairly significant.
I believe. You want to answer that, Representative of the FBI?
The smoke from the World Financial Center was from a defective generator that the fire department worked on. There was no major fire at the World Financial Center.
A statement from the FBI. The FBI.
I'll make a brief statement. Obviously, as you all know, this is a pending criminal investigation. I can tell you that it is being coordinated by Director Mueller at FBI headquarters. We have essentially all 56 field offices in the country involved in this. There are primarily a dozen offices where the airplanes were hijacked and left. We're doing a lot of things as far as at those particular airports, checking on the planes, checking with crews, cleaning people. All of that is ongoing as we speak. Probably the major thrust that we are doing right now is we do have the manifest. We're reaching out to all of the families, interviewing them, and the primary purpose of that is obviously to get any information. You have had, in the media has reported, there's been a number of calls made from these various planes. We would like to put out to the people, if they haven't reported that to law enforcement, to call their local law enforcement or FBI so we can get a hold of it. The obvious thrust for us right at this particular point in time is to identify the number and the individuals who were in fact hijackers. So that is the major thrust. We will be doing a crime scene. The primary thing is, as the mayor just pointed out to you, is the black boxes. We're working with the city, but again, that's going to follow the search and rescue, ongoing intensive investigation. That's all I have at this time.
Can you say anything about the arrest in Florida and the seizure of a car in Florida and the seizure of a car in
We have a number of leads that we're running around the country. A number of these, I'm not going to get into specifics other than it's my understanding we did detain some individuals over in New Jersey. Essentially, we are finding out that that is not all that relevant at this particular point in time, but I'm going to limit my comments. That is going to any of the investigative news pertaining to this investigation will come out of Washington, D.C.
Is there anyone in custody at this time? Is there anyone in custody at this time?
Other than the ones that I just mentioned to you, there are some over in New Jersey. That's the only.
Mr. Mon, can you explain to us, Mr. Mon, how airports, airlines that have been hijacked could come into the New York area without being detected by radar, without the route that they were taken being questioned by people in Transcon or radar?
I can't really answer that. That would be FAA and NTSB. I'm not going to get in. I don't know the answer to that.
Did you have any warning at all that there were hijacked planes in the air?
No, I can tell you this was a surprise. As the mayor and the governor has pointed out, it was a surprise, a shock. We had no forewarning of this happening.
Mr. Mon, there were reports that the FBI was investigating a hijacked plane just before the first plane hit the World Trade Center. Is that true?
I'm not aware of that.
Do you have any sense at this point of the range of potentially of people that were in the World Trade Centers and that are still missing or presumed dead? What is even the conceivable range that there is at this point?
The numbers that we're working on are in the thousands. Obviously, we hope that's not the case, but the estimate would be for both of the buildings that although building number 2 had a chance to clear out, a lot of people probably cleared out of building number 2. Building number 1 had some time to clear out, but there were areas of it that were affected. The best estimate that we can make, relying on the Port Authority and just everyone else that has experience with this, is that there'll be a few thousand people left in each building.
Mr. Mayor, you talked about...
And then our recovery relief efforts and our work with the medical examiner are premised on those kinds of numbers.
Mayor, can you explain, if there are thousands of bodies and there were 120 trucks of debris taken out, where are the bodies if there's only 41 confirmed fatalities? Where are the rest of them?
A lot of the debris that was taken out are structural things that were in the way of the relief effort. I don't know that the debris was actually taken out of the actual buildings that fell. But if some of you haven't been down there, but the area was very constricted by lots of structural damage and things that were in the street. So a lot of the debris that was taken away, I suspect, was the debris that blocks the entry and exit of the vehicles that have to go in and out of there.